Keanu didn't plan this birthday the way celebrities usually do. He planned it the way a man plans something when he's terrified of losing the one person who made him believe in the future again. The city outside was loud and bright, but inside their quiet home the night felt strangely heavy. Alexandra sat at her desk, a half-finished painting drying in muted shades of blue and silver. It was the evening before her birthday, and for the first time in years she was dreading the date. Another year older, another reminder of how quickly time moved, of everything she had lost before she ever met Keanu, friends, family, even the younger version of herself who believed nothing bad could last forever. She told him earlier in a soft, joking voice, "No party this year, okay? Just let it be another day." But beneath the joke, he heard the tremor of real fear. Keanu sat across the room, pretending to read a script he could no longer focus on. He watched the way Alexandra's shoulders curled in just a little, the way her smile never quite reached her eyes anymore whenever birthdays were mentioned. He knew why. Birthdays had become a catalog of absence for her, names of people who used to call, voices that would never be heard again. He'd memorized those stories. Her best friend who died too young, her mother whose last birthday call still echoed in Alexandra's memory like a ghost she couldn't put down. Keanu carried his own ghosts too, and sometimes their grief felt like a third presence in the room, sitting quietly between them. That was why her request for no party cut deeper than it sounded. Keanu understood that what she really meant was no reminders, no spotlight on the years I can't get back. Part of him wanted to respect that completely. He'd always tried to give people as much space as they needed, especially the people he loved. But as he watched her stare too long at a single brushstroke lost somewhere far away, another thought crept in. If they surrendered every joyful ritual to grief, then grief had already won. And he knew what it meant to let pain make all the decisions. He'd done that for years. Later, when Alexandra went to shower, Keanu walked into the kitchen and leaned against the counter, hands pressed flat on the cool marble. He stared at the blank wall and felt the old familiar war begin inside him. The careful, quiet man who hated making a fuss, and the man who had finally found someone he wanted to fight for. He could do what she asked, keep the day small, safe, invisible. Or he could risk everything and try to reclaim it for her, knowing it might hurt before it healed. The thought of getting it wrong made his chest tighten. What if a surprise pushed her deeper into sadness instead of pulling her out? His phone buzzed with a new message from a close friend. "You sure you don't want us to do anything for Alex tomorrow?" Keanu stared at the words. In his mind, he saw two different versions of the coming night. One where they sat at home with takeout, talking quietly, pretending the date was nothing. And another where Alexandra walked into a room full of soft lights, flowers, and people who silently vowed to hold her heart with care. In one version, he kept her safe from any possible disappointment. In the other, he risked reopening every scar, just to show her that love still knew how to celebrate her existence. He typed, erased, then typed again, his thumb hovering over the send button as his mind replayed the way she had once told him, "I'm scared the best years of my life are behind me." The memory sliced through his hesitation. He didn't believe that, not for her, not for them. But believing wasn't enough, he had to prove it in a way she could feel in her bones. His heart pounded in his ears as he finally crafted a reply that would decide everything. He took one last breath, glanced toward the hallway where he could hear the shower still running, and made his choice. He hit send, agreeing to something far bigger than just a party, without having any idea that the promise he'd just made would collide head-on with a secret Alexandra had been hiding from him for weeks. Alexandra dried her hair slowly, watching herself in the fogged bathroom mirror as if studying a stranger. The silver in her hair had spread more this year. She traced a line of it with the tip of her finger and tried to smile. Somewhere beneath the surface, a knot of guilt tightened again. In the bottom drawer of her studio desk, hidden under old sketchbooks, lay the envelope from the clinic, test results she hadn't been ready to share with anyone, not even Keanu. She told herself it was probably nothing serious, that she was just being dramatic. Still, the words "further investigation" echoed in the back of her mind like a ticking clock. In the living room, she found Keanu closing his laptop a little too fast, his expression smoothing into casualness a second too late. "Script trouble?" she asked lightly, trying to sound normal. He shrugged with that gentle half-smile of his, the one that always looked like an apology for taking up space. "Just details," he said. "You sure you don't want to do anything special tomorrow?" Alexandra forced her shoulders to relax, ignoring the wave of dizziness that passed through her. "I'm turning years not winning an Oscar," she joked. "Let's just order something, hide from the world, and pretend time doesn't exist." She hoped he couldn't see how much she needed the day to be quiet, how much energy it already took just to act okay. Keanu watched her cross the room and sink into the couch beside him. Up close, the tiredness around her eyes looked less like lack of sleep and more like something deeper, something heavier. He had noticed it for a while now, the way she rubbed her temples when she thought no one was looking, the subtle way her hand sometimes trembled when she lifted a mug. He asked a few times if she was feeling all right, and every time she gave him the same careful answer, "I'm fine, just working too much." Part of him wanted to push harder to demand the truth, but another part was terrified of what that truth might be. So instead, he tried to build small pockets of light, good meals, long walks, bad movies at 2 a.m., anything to keep the shadows at bay. The rest of the evening unfolded in soft, ordinary moments. They ate leftover pasta, talked about a book they both meant to read, argued playfully over which painting of hers he loved most. Alexandra leaned into him on the couch, listening to his heartbeat, trying not to imagine what he would do if he knew about the envelope. She wasn't even sure why she was hiding it. Maybe because saying it out loud would make the fear solid real. Maybe because she couldn't bear to add her anxiety to the list of burdens he already carried quietly. Old losses, endless public scrutiny, the expectation to always be gracious, kind, steady. He had become a safe place in a world that rarely felt safe. She didn't want to fracture that sanctuary with more bad news. When she finally fell asleep curled against his shoulder, Keanu stared at the ceiling in the darkened room, his mind racing through logistics. He'd already sent the message. There was no going back. Tomorrow, while she thought he was running a quick errand, he would meet their friends at a small event space he'd rented weeks ago, a warm, intimate room filled with flowers, candles, and photographs from her life and work. He imagined her walking in, the look of surprise softening into something like joy. He wanted her to see, plainly and undeniably, how many lives she had touched, how many people were grateful she existed. Yet underneath the plans, an unease he couldn't name tugged at him. Her laughter tonight had sounded thin around the edges, like it had to travel through something dense before reaching the air. At one point, when she thought he wasn't looking, he'd seen her press 2 fingers hard against the inside of her wrist, as if counting a pulse that wouldn't settle. He almost asked then, almost broke the fragile peace of the evening with a simple, risky question. "What's really going on, Alex?" But the words died in his throat. Tomorrow, he told himself, he'd make the day so full of love that whatever she was carrying, she would finally feel safe enough to share it. As the clock slid toward midnight, Keanu kissed her forehead and carefully eased himself from under her, tucking a blanket around her shoulders. He stood there for a long moment, watching her sleep, fighting the urge to cancel everything and just hold her until the fear in his chest calmed down. Instead, he walked quietly to his desk and opened a new note on his phone, starting a list of last-minute things he needed. Her favorite flowers, that specific cake she loved from a tiny bakery across town, a playlist of songs that had become the soundtrack of their years together. He didn't see Alexandra's eyes open, just a crack as he stepped into the hallway. She watched his silhouette move away and felt a twist of panic. She knew that careful, determined walk. He was planning something. A party, maybe. A surprise. Something that would put her in the center of a room when she barely felt strong enough to stand at the edge of it. Her heart pounded faster as another thought, sharper and crueler, slipped in. If the results were bad, truly bad, what would that party be then but a beautiful lie? The blanket suddenly felt too heavy. Alexandra lay very still in the dark, listening to him moving somewhere in the house, planning in secret, while the secret in her desk drawer waited silently for her to finally decide whether to tell him before her birthday or after. Keanu drove back across the city with his hands tight on the steering wheel, the late afternoon sun sliding in and out of clouds like a flickering projector. The venue was ready, friends were texting excited photos of the decorations. The cake had arrived exactly as he'd ordered, white frosting, strawberries, small sugar flowers that reminded him of the first bouquet he'd ever given her. Everything was perfect on paper. And yet the brief message from Alexandra, "Yeah, I'm okay," played in his mind like a line from a script he didn't believe. She never said okay when she was actually okay. She said ridiculously alive or questionably functional or something wry and strange. Okay from her meant don't look too closely. He pulled into their driveway and just sat there for a moment, engine off, listening to the ticking of metal cooling under the hood. A voice in his head whispered that he should postpone everything, make up an excuse, take her somewhere quiet instead. Another voice replied with equal force, "You can't keep tiptoeing around pain. You promised yourself you wouldn't live like that anymore." Between those two voices, his heart pounded undecided. Finally, he took a long breath and walked toward the front door, rehearsing a casual smile. Inside, the house felt strangely still, like a painting of itself. "Alex," he called, setting his keys down. No answer. For a second, panic surged, too many old memories of coming home to bad news, of empty rooms and ringing phones. He moved through the hallway faster until he reached her studio door, slightly ajar. He pushed it open and found her sitting at her desk, back to him, shoulders drawn tight. There was paper in front of her, and from the way her hand hovered above it, he knew she'd been staring more than reading. "Hey," he said softly, "thought you'd be napping. I was going to wake you up with something suitably dramatic. Balloons, maybe." The joke landed flat in the quiet room. Alexandra turned slowly, and when he saw her face, his chest clenched. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but not from fresh tears, more like from the effort of not crying. "I knew you were planning something," she said, voice low, almost apologetic. "You're terrible at secrets, you know that?" She tried to smile, but it wavered. He stepped closer, instinct pulling him toward her, but something about the angle of her shoulders made him pause. She was bracing for impact. Keanu's gaze dropped to the papers on the desk. The clinic's logo, medical language, lines of black text that turned his blood to ice before he could even make sense of them. He swallowed, throat suddenly dry. "What's that?" he asked, even though he already knew it wasn't a new art contract or a gallery invitation. Alexandra let out a brittle little laugh, the sound of a door creaking on rusted hinges. "This," she said, tapping the top page with one finger, "is why I didn't want a birthday this year." Her hand trembled as she spoke, and this time she didn't bother to hide it. "I was hoping I could just skip the whole thing, pretend time wasn't moving forward until I knew whether I actually had much of it left." For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. The words settled between them like dust in sunlight. Keanu felt the world tilt slightly off its axis. "Much of it left," he repeated quietly, as if testing how those words tasted in his mouth. His eyes met hers, searching, refusing to accept the worst meaning. "Alex, what are you talking about?" She turned back to the papers, picking them up with a slow, careful precision that betrayed how deeply she was shaking inside. "I didn't mean to keep it from you," she began, which wasn't entirely true, and they both knew it. I wanted to be sure before I made you carry it too. It might be nothing. They're still running tests, but there are some abnormal markers, neurological. They're worried about something with my brain, maybe my nervous system. They don't know yet." Her voice thinned on those last three words, as if the uncertainty hurt more than any definitive diagnosis might have. Keanu listened to every syllable like it was being carved into him. For a moment, all he could hear was a distant roar in his ears, memories of other hospital rooms, other doctors, other words like maybe and we're not sure yet. He realized his hand had reached for the back of the chair in front of him just to stay grounded. "How long have you known?" he asked, and the quiet steadiness of his voice surprised even him. "A couple of weeks," she admitted, shame washed over her face. "I got dizzy in the studio. My hand went numb for a few seconds while I was drawing. I thought it was just stress or dehydration, but it kept happening, so I went to get tests. I told myself I'd tell you after I knew for sure what we were dealing with. Then suddenly my birthday was here and they still didn't know, and it just felt." She broke off, pressing her lips together hard. "I didn't want to look into your eyes while saying, 'Hey, there's a possibility my brain is about to betray me,' and watch your whole world collapse again." Silence stretched between them, heavy and fragile. Keanu stepped around the desk slowly, never taking his eyes off her, and knelt in front of her chair. Up close, he could see the fear she'd been hiding, the way her jaw clenched, the shallow rise and fall of her chest. He gently took the papers from her hand and set them aside, then cupped her face, thumbs resting against her cheekbones. "You don't get to decide what I can or can't carry," he said, voice low but firm. There was a quiet fire there, the kind he usually kept buried. "That's not how this works, not for us." Her eyes filled and she blinked hard, embarrassed by the tears. "I didn't want to be another tragedy in your life," she whispered. "You've lost so much already. I told myself I was protecting you." His expression softened with a tenderness that made her chest ache. "Alex, you are not a tragedy. Whatever this is, whatever it becomes, you are not a tragedy. You're my life. And I don't want a version of that life where you're carrying this alone in another room while I'm out buying flowers." The word flowers slipped out before he could stop it, and they both froze. The hidden world he'd built for tonight collided brutally with the stark present on the desk between them. She let out a shaky breath. "So there is a party," she said quietly, not accusing, just tired. "I knew it. You're planning something with everyone." He nodded once, honesty the only possible choice now. "I wanted to give you one night where the loudest thing in the room was love, not fear." He hesitated, searching her face. But if you don't want it, I'll cancel everything right now. I mean that. I don't care how much we've planned. I care about you. If all you can handle tonight is the two of us on a couch in silence, then that's what we'll do." For the first time since he'd walked into the room, something complicated flickered in her eyes. Relief and grief tangled together. The idea of walking into a party now felt impossible, an emotional cliff she wasn't sure she had the strength to climb. But the idea of him quietly calling everyone, dismantling this moment of celebration he'd built with such careful, humble love that hurt too, in a different way. "You were really going to do all that for me?" she asked, almost like she didn't trust the image fully. "Even after I told you I didn't want a party?" He managed a crooked half-smile. "I was going to break the rules and hope you forgave me, maybe eventually, maybe around cake." Then the smile faded and he searched her face more seriously. "I thought, if I could just remind you how much light you've put into the world, maybe this birthday wouldn't feel like a countdown. Maybe it would feel like a promise." Her throat tightened. A promise. The word settled in the air like a fragile glass ornament. "And now," she asked, voice small, "now that you know—" She glanced toward the papers, then back at him, terrified of what answer might be waiting in his silence. Keanu held her gaze, his own eyes shining now, though no tears fell. "Now," he said slowly, "I think we need that reminder more than ever." She stared at him, trying to read whether this was stubborn optimism or genuine, grounded belief. A part of her wanted to say yes, to lean into his conviction, to let herself be lifted by whatever strength he could offer. Another part felt like running, shutting the lights, locking the doors, hiding until the results came back so she wouldn't have to perform courage she didn't feel yet. "What if what if it's bad?" she finally whispered. "What if this is our last normal birthday and we're wasting it pretending everything's fine?" Keanu didn't look away. "Then we're not pretending," he said. "We're choosing to make tonight about who you are, not about what might happen to you." His voice broke a little on the next words, but he kept going. "If this is our last normal birthday, and I am not accepting that yet, but if it is, do you really want to spend it running from the people who love you most?" Alexandra closed her eyes, tears slipping free now, and for a moment she let the weight of his question sink all the way in. Her greatest fear had always been being seen as fragile, pitied, handled like glass. But his eyes held something else entirely, not pity, but a stubborn, quiet reverence. He wasn't asking her to be brave alone. He was asking her to let him and everyone else be brave with her. She opened her eyes again, heart thudding painfully. "I don't know if I can stand in a room like that without falling apart," she admitted. "I don't know if I can smile and say thank you while this is buzzing in my head." He nodded slowly. "Then don't," he said. "If you go, you don't have to perform. You don't have to pretend you're okay. If you cry, you cry. If you need to leave early, we leave. I'll make sure everyone understands without telling them everything. Kindness is the rule tonight, or there is no tonight." But he took her hands, squeezing them gently. "I think you deserve to see with your own eyes how much you matter, especially now when fear is trying to convince you you're already disappearing." The room felt very small, very quiet. Alexandra looked down at their joined hands, then at the faint paint smudge on his wrist, a leftover from where she'd brushed past him earlier without noticing. Ordinary details in an extraordinary moment. The thought of walking into a party still scared her. But the thought of letting fear dictate every inch of this day suddenly felt like surrendering more than just an evening. It felt like surrendering her whole future before she even knew what it held. She drew a shaky breath, mind racing, heart split cleanly between dread and the faintest, most fragile thread of hope. After a long, trembling pause, she finally lifted her eyes to his and began to speak the decision that would shape not only this birthday, but everything that came after. Alexandra's mouth felt dry as she tried to form the words. The decision lodged halfway between her fear and his faith. She thought of the envelope, of the sterile white walls of the clinic, of the subtle way the world had already started to tilt off-center in her mind. Then she looked at Keanu, really looked at him, the quiet determination in his eyes. The way his hands held hers not like something fragile, but like something precious he refused to let slip away. "I'm scared," she said at last, voice barely above a whisper. It was not an answer, not exactly, but it was the most honest thing she had. "I'm scared that if I walk into that room, everyone will see right through me, that they'll feel it even if I don't say it, that I'm not okay, that something is wrong." Her eyes searched his face, pleading for reassurance that didn't sound like a platitude. Keanu nodded, accepting the fear instead of arguing it away. "You are scared," he agreed. "So am I, but being scared and being alone with it, that's too much for anyone." He paused, choosing his words carefully. We've both lost enough to know there are no guarantees, but we also know what regret feels like. I don't want you 6 months from now to look back and think, I let fear steal that night from me. Whatever happens with the tests, this day is still yours. It belongs to you, not to the doctors, not to the worst-case scenarios in your head. The image he painted, a future version of herself, looking back with regret, cut through her in a way the medical language hadn't. She imagined herself in a hospital bed or sitting in some sterile waiting room, remembering the night she'd refused to be celebrated because she was too afraid of not surviving long enough to deserve it. The thought hurt more than the idea of crying in front of friends ever could. Alexandra pulled her hands free, stood up, and walked to the window. Outside, the late afternoon light had deepened into a warm, golden glow, sliding over the tops of buildings. Life went on, oblivious. People walked dogs, carried groceries, checked their phones at crosswalks. Somewhere a car horn blared and a child laughed. The world did not stop for anyone's fear. She pressed her forehead lightly against the glass. "If I go," she said slowly, "I can't pretend. I can't be the charming artist or the graceful girlfriend of the movie star. I'm not sure I can even stand up straight for long without breaking." Her reflection in the glass looked older, more fragile than she felt inside. What if I ruin it? What if everyone leaves more worried than happy? Keanu walked up behind her, leaving a respectful inch of space, his voice soft but steady. "If you go, you only have to be you," he said. "Whatever version of you shows up, that's who the night is for. If people leave worried, then they leave loving you more honestly. That's not ruining anything. That's just truth." He exhaled, his breath fogging a small patch of glass beside hers. "But if we stay home and pretend nothing is wrong, you'll still be scared. You'll still have the same questions. Only then, we'll also have an empty room where there could have been light." Her shoulders shook once, a small, contained sob trying to escape. She let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped for weeks. "I don't want to be brave," she said, eyes still on the street below. "I want to be ordinary, to worry about which dress to wear, not whether I'll be able to remember my own name in a year." He considered this quietly, then answered with a gentleness that carried its own strength. "Maybe being brave tonight just means letting yourself be held," he said. "By me, by them, by all the love you've spent so many years giving away to other people. Ordinary courage, the kind that shows up with puffy eyes and shaky hands and still says, 'Okay, I'll try.'" The simplicity of that definition, bravery as allowing herself to be held, slipped past the armored places she'd been guarding. Alexandra closed her eyes, feeling another decision breaking open inside her. She could walk into that room as a woman with a flawless life, or she could walk in as she truly was, uncertain, afraid, but deeply, undeniably alive. "All right," she whispered finally. She turned to face him, cheeks wet, but there was a faint, stubborn light behind the tears. "Okay, I'll go, but on one condition." She pointed a trembling finger at his chest. "If I want to leave, we leave. No arguments, no speeches about courage. You just take my hand and get me out." A slow, relieved smile spread over his face, the kind that started in his eyes and then found his mouth. "Deal," he said. "You say the word and we're gone. We'll come home, steal the cake, eat it in the kitchen at 2 in the morning." He reached out, brushing a tear from her cheek with the back of his knuckle. "Thank you," he added, voice quiet, "for trusting me with this, with you." Her laugh came out shaky but real. "You're the one who planned a secret party while I was quietly contemplating my own mortality," she said. "I should probably be warning you about your life choices, not thanking you." Still, she squeezed his hand back, a silent truce between fear and hope. He leaned his forehead against hers for a long moment, letting the closeness steady them both. "We don't tell anyone about the tests tonight," she said suddenly, pulling back just enough to meet his eyes. "Not yet. I'm not ready for that many worried faces. I want to see them smile. I want to remember what it feels like to be celebrated for who I am, not pitied for what might be coming." Keanu nodded without hesitation. "Your story, your timing," he agreed. "If anyone notices you're tired, I'll tell them you've been working too hard, which is also true. There's no lie in protecting your heart until you're ready." He took a breath, as if sealing the agreement inside him. "Tonight is about love, not illness. About gratitude, not fear. We'll hold the rest quietly, just for us for now." Alexandra wiped her cheeks with the heels of her hands and let out a long, unsteady exhale. "Then I guess I should find something to wear to my own ambush," she said, a faint spark of humor finally returning to her voice. "If I'm going to fall apart in public, I might as well do it in a decent dress." He chuckled softly, the sound breaking some of the room's heaviness. "You could go in paint-stained pajamas and you'd still be the most beautiful person there," he said, then grimaced playfully. But yes, a dress might confuse them into thinking this was all your idea. As she turned toward the closet, he watched her with a mix of awe and ache. She moved more slowly than she used to, but there was a quiet ferocity in the way she squared her shoulders. He knew this choice cost her something real. She was walking toward a night that would demand more emotional courage than any red carpet ever had. In the mirror, as she lifted a silver dress from its hanger, Alexandra caught his reflection, still standing there in the doorway of her studio, hands tucked in his pockets like he was afraid to touch anything too suddenly. Their eyes met through the glass, framed by fairy lights and paint-splattered canvases. For the first time that day, she let herself imagine a future where this scare turned out to be just that, a scare. A close call that sharpened their gratitude and softened their edges instead of an ending. "I'm trusting you," she said again, quietly, half to him and half to the version of herself who would step into that room. "Don't let me regret it." His answer was simple and solemn, carrying more weight than most vows. "I won't." Outside, the sky was already beginning to darken, the first stars hiding just beyond sight, waiting to appear at the exact moment the lights would come on in a room across town. A room filled with roses, photographs, and a circle of people holding their breath, waiting for the woman of the hour who was just now, in a small house, deciding to walk right into the center of her own fear. The drive to the venue felt shorter than usual, as if time had been folded in on itself. Keanu kept one hand lightly on the steering wheel and the other resting on the space between them, palm open. Every few minutes, Alexandra's fingers would find his, gripping just a little too tight when the car hit a bump or when a new, unwanted thought flashed through her mind. She stared out the passenger window, watching the city lights blink on one by one like tiny declarations. Life, life, life. The silver dress she'd chosen shimmered subtly whenever she shifted, catching light from the dashboard and throwing it back in quiet defiance. Her hair, streaked with natural gray, framed her face with an elegance she didn't entirely feel yet. Inside, she was still the woman who had sat at her desk that afternoon convinced she might be running out of tomorrows. On the outside, she looked like someone arriving at the best chapter of her life. As they neared the venue, Keanu glanced over. "Last chance to order pizza and turn around," he said softly. "We can still make this a two-person rebellion against the world." The offer was sincere. She could hear it in the careful way he spoke. He wasn't pushing her forward now, just walking beside her, matching her pace. Alexandra inhaled slowly, held it for a beat, then let it out. "If we turn around now," she murmured, eyes still on the blur of passing storefronts, "I think I'd always wonder what I walked away from." She angled her head toward him, a ghost of a smile at the corner of her mouth. "And besides, I want to see what Keanu Reeves planning a party actually looks like. This might be my only chance. You're not exactly known for spectacle." He laughed under his breath. "You'd be surprised what I'll do when properly motivated," he replied. "There's even a playlist. I learned how to use 3 different apps for this, which I think legally qualifies as a heroic act at my age." The lightness of their banter didn't erase the tension, but it wove around it, softening the edges. When he pulled into the parking lot behind the building, Alexandra felt her heart start to race in earnest. She could see soft golden light spilling from somewhere inside, glowing against the evening dark. The sight felt unreal, like standing outside a theater about to watch a play she'd somehow been cast in without auditioning. Keanu parked and turned off the engine. The sudden quiet was louder than any noise. He looked at her carefully. "Remember the deal," he said. "One word from you and we're out. I won't argue, I won't hesitate. You won't have to explain anything to anyone." He paused, his own nerves creeping in now that the moment was here. "You ready?" "No," she answered honestly. Then after a heartbeat, she added, "But I'm going anyway." She squeezed his hand once, then opened the door before she could talk herself out of it. Inside, behind a set of double doors, the room buzzed with low voices and the rustle of last-minute preparations. Their closest friends, a few family members and colleagues from Alexandra's art world gathered quietly, holding bouquets, straightening tablecloths, and stealing glances at the entrance. They'd been told to be gentle, to keep it intimate, to let Alexandra set the tone. No loud surprises, no shouting, just presence. The moment Keanu and Alexandra stepped into the dim entry hallway, the buzz on the other side of the doors grew muffled, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Alexandra's steps slowed. Her fingers curled around his arm, and he felt the small tremor she tried to hide. "Hey," he whispered, leaning closer. "Look at me for a second, not the door." She turned, and for a moment they were just 2 people standing under a weak overhead light, the rest of the world blurred. "Whatever happens when we open that," he said, nodding toward the doors, We face it together. You don't have to perform, you don't have to smile, you just have to walk in as you are. That's enough, more than enough. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Somewhere deep inside, the younger, braver version of herself, the one who used to walk into galleries with her head high, daring the world to underestimate her, stirred just a little. She straightened her shoulders but didn't try to smooth the emotion from her face. If she cried, she cried. If her voice shook, it shook. Tonight, pretending was off the table. Keanu lifted one hand and quietly signaled to the coordinator waiting near the door. The lights inside dimmed slightly, a cue to everyone that the moment had arrived. Then, with a gentle push, he opened one of the doors and stepped back so Alexandra would walk in first, not as someone being presented, but as someone being welcomed. She crossed the threshold. The first thing she saw was light, not harsh or theatrical, but soft, golden, wrapping the room in warmth. Fairy lights draped from the ceiling, candles flickered on tables, and along one wall, photographs of her life were pinned like constellations. Images of her in old studios, at book signings, laughing with friends, caught mid-gesture explaining a painting. In the center, a long table held a cake crowned with candles, surrounded by vases of roses in shades of pink and cream, the room smelling faintly of vanilla and fresh flowers. Then she saw the people. They didn't shout, they didn't jump or scare her. Instead, a gentle wave of applause rose, soft and steady, as if they were all standing to honor something sacred. Faces she loved turned toward her, former students, gallery owners, fellow artists, quiet friends from years ago who had flown in without telling her. A few wiped at their eyes. Some simply smiled with a depth that spoke of shared history. For a moment, Alexandra's mind went blank, overwhelmed by the sight of so many witnesses to her life gathered in one place. She felt her throat close. Her first instinct to smile big, crack a joke, deflect the emotion faltered. Something inside her refused to armor up. The tears came faster than she could stop them. The room blurred. Beside her, Keanu's hand slid into hers, grounding. "They're here for you," he murmured, just loud enough for her to hear. "Not for the idea of you, for you." She took a shaky breath, willing her legs to keep moving. As they stepped further into the room, people began drifting closer, not in a rush, but almost in a slow orbit around her. Hugs came, gentle, careful, wordless. "Happy birthday," whispered into her hair. "You look beautiful," breathed into her ear. A former student clasped her hand with both of hers and said, voice trembling, "You saved me, you know that? Your class, your words, I wouldn't be here without you." Alexandra could barely manage a nod in response. In the far corner, someone started the playlist Keanu had made. Soft music rose, the kind that made conversation easier rather than drowning it out. It wasn't a party in the traditional sense. It felt more like a gathering at the foot of a lighthouse, people warming themselves in borrowed courage and shared affection. At one point, Alexandra caught sight of a large framed photo on an easel near the cake. A candid shot of her at 19, paint on her cheek, eyes fierce and bright. A younger version of herself, unafraid of the future because she hadn't yet learned how much it could take. The sight cracked something open. She walked toward it like it was calling her. "That was from an old zine interview," a friend said from behind her, smiling. "You told the camera, I want to spend my life making people feel less alone." Remember, Alexandra didn't, not the exact moment. But as she gazed at the girl in the photo, she realized, somewhere along the way, she had kept that promise. This room was proof. Tears blurred her vision again. Someone pressed a tissue into her hand. She wasn't hiding them anymore. Across the room, Keanu watched her move slowly from cluster to cluster, talking, laughing, crying in honest, unguarded bursts. He'd expected to spend the evening shielding her, intercepting too intense conversations, and maybe he still would. But right now, he saw something else happening. The fear that had been tightening around her was loosening under the weight of other people's gratitude. Still, he caught moments most others missed. The way her hand occasionally drifted to her temple, brief flashes of pain or dizziness. The way she leaned discreetly on the back of a chair when she thought no one was looking, catching her balance. Each little sign tugged at his heart, but he made himself stay steady. This night belonged to her courage, not his fear. After a while, someone dimmed the lights further and gently called for attention. A path opened through the room as Keanu guided Alexandra toward the cake. The candles glowed, their small flames flickering like a row of fragile possibilities. Everyone gathered around, the warmth of their bodies and their love forming a quiet wall against the dark just beyond the windows. Alexandra stared at the candles, suddenly unsure what to do with all that light focused on her. Birthdays had always been simple before, quick wishes, silly hopes. This one felt dangerous, heavy. How do you compress all of your fear and longing into one silent wish when you don't know what your body is hiding from you? Someone called out softly, "Speech, speech." Others echoed, gentle but expectant. She glanced at Keanu, panic rising. He squeezed her hand under the table. "Say whatever's true," he murmured. "Even if it's just 2 sentences, or say nothing, they'll understand." Alexandra looked up at the circle of faces around her. Some tearful, some bright, all open. For the first time since she'd walked in, she felt not just seen, but held. The girl in the photo on the easel, the woman in the silver dress, the unknown future self waiting beyond test results. All of them stood together in this moment. She cleared her throat, voice shaky. "I don't know what to say," she began honestly, a nervous laugh rippling through the room. "I told him," she jerked her head toward Keanu, "that I didn't want a party this year, and then he did this anyway." Soft chuckles, affectionate glances in his direction, she swallowed. "I've been afraid of this birthday, I won't lie, afraid of time, of what it means, of what it might be taking from me." Her hands trembled on the edge of the table, but she kept going, words coming from somewhere deeper than her rehearsed social self. "But standing here looking at all of you, I'm realizing something. Time isn't just about what we lose, it's also about what we get to give. You're all proof of that somehow, proof that the years haven't just taken things from me. They've also given me you." Her voice cracked on the last word, but she didn't pull back from it. The room was completely still now, the hum of refrigerators and distant traffic temporarily erased by the intensity of listening. She took one more breath. "So I guess my wish tonight isn't about more years," she said softly. "It's about more of this, more moments where love is louder than fear, whatever happens next." She looked at Keanu, eyes shining, and in their reflection he saw not just the woman he loved, but the blazing courage beneath her trembling. He'd planned this night to remind her she mattered. Instead, she was reminding everyone in the room why they did. "Okay," she whispered, turning back to the cake. "Here goes nothing, or everything, I'm not sure." She leaned forward, drew in a deep breath, and as the candle flames wavered in the draft, the whole room seemed to hold that breath with her, waiting to see whether this wish would mark the beginning of a story or the start of a goodbye. Alexandra blew out the candles in one long, deliberate exhale. The flames vanished, replaced by a soft hiss and a thin ribbon of smoke curling toward the ceiling. For a heartbeat, the darkness that followed felt symbolic, too symbolic, like an omen. But then someone turned the lights up just a notch, laughter broke the silence, and the spell shattered into something gentler. Applause, cheers, the clink of glasses being lifted. She straightened slowly, a little dizzy from holding her breath so long, and felt Keanu's hand at the small of her back, steadying. "You did it," he murmured, as if she'd just run a marathon instead of leaned over a cake. "How do you feel?" She considered the question honestly. "Like I might cry," she admitted, "but also like I'm here, really here, not in my head, not in the what-ifs." She looked up at him, a small, surprised smile tugging at her lips. "I forgot for a second about the tests, about everything. I just felt loved." "That was the whole point," he said, voice thick. Slices of cake were passed around, the room filling again with low conversation and soft music. People drifted back into little islands of connection, sharing stories about Alexandra, laughing over old memories. Several times she overheard her own name floating through the air, paired with words like kind, brave, changed my life. Each time it landed differently now. Less like pressure, more like proof that whatever the future held, something good and real had already happened because she'd been here. At one table near the back, an old friend of Keanu's clapped him on the shoulder. "You did good, man," he said quietly, watching Alexandra from across the room as she listened intently to a young artist describing her first exhibition. "She looks held, you know." Keanu followed his gaze, heart swelling at the sight of Alexandra leaning in, eyes bright, genuinely present. But even in this warmth, the awareness of her earlier confession sat like a stone under his ribs. Every time she pressed her fingers briefly to her temple, every time her smile faltered for half a second, he felt a flash of helpless anger at the invisible thing that might be growing inside her. He wanted to fix it, fight it, bargain with it. None of those were options. What he could do was this: make tonight a memory so strong it would stand even if everything else started to blur. Later, as the music shifted to slower, more contemplative songs, someone lowered the lights again. A friend tapped a glass with a spoon to get attention. "There's one more thing," she said, glancing at Keanu with a conspiratorial grin. "I was told there would be no long speeches tonight, but no one said anything about a small one." A ripple of amusement passed through the room. Alexandra looked at Keanu suspiciously. "What did you do?" she whispered. He shook his head, genuinely surprised, hands lifted in innocence. Not me, I swear. I thought the cake was the finale. The friend stepped aside, gesturing to a small portable projector near the back wall. The room dimmed a little more. A moment later, the blank wall behind the cake flickered to life with moving images. A montage of Alexandra's life and work, set to music. Childhood photographs, early sketches, quick clips of her speaking at events, candid moments of her and Keanu in quiet, unguarded laughter. Interspersed throughout were short video messages from people who couldn't be there in person. Students in other countries, fellow artists on tour, a librarian from a city where she'd once done a residency workshop. "Alexandra," said one man in the video, his accent thick and eyes shining, "you don't know this, but the mural you helped us create in our neighborhood, it stopped 2 kids from joining a gang. They came to paint every day instead. You changed the map of their lives." Another voice followed. "You told me once that art is a way of saying I was here. Well, your work has been my proof that I can be here too." As story after story unfolded across the wall, Alexandra felt herself unraveling in the best possible way. Tears slipped down her cheeks unchecked. This wasn't a highlight reel of success. It was a living testimony that her existence had rippled outward in ways she'd never fully understood. The fear that had whispered, "What if my life hasn't mattered enough?" found itself outnumbered by dozens of quiet, undeniable answers. Beside her, Keanu watched her far more than the screen. He saw the moment the heaviness in her shoulders eased slightly, the way her expression moved from overwhelmed to rooted. As if, for the first time since the test results, she believed that whatever happened to her body, nothing could erase what she had already given. The montage ended on a simple still image. Alexandra standing in front of one of her murals, paint on her hands, a radiant, unself-conscious smile on her face. Underneath, in clean white letters, a single line appeared. "You made us feel less alone." The room was quiet for a beat, then filled with soft applause again. Alexandra wiped her face with a laugh that broke on a sob. "Okay," she said hoarsely. "That was unfair. I did not consent to a full emotional excavation." Her friend grinned, eyes wet too. "Consider it evidence, counselor," she replied, "in the case of Alexandra Grant versus her own doubts." The tension broke into laughter. Someone reset the music. Conversations blossomed again, but something subtle had shifted. The party no longer felt like a distraction from the fear, it felt like a counterweight to it. After another hour of gentle chaos, the crowd began to thin. Hugs at the door. Promises to call, to visit, to send links and recipes and photos. No one knew about the test results, but many left with a strange, shared intuition that this night had mattered more than a typical birthday, that it had been in some unnamed way a gathering of strength. When the last guests had gone and the staff were clearing empty glasses, Alexandra and Keanu finally found themselves alone at a small table near the back, surrounded by wilting flowers and half-melted candles. The room felt intimate again, like it had in the afternoon before anyone arrived, but now it carried the echo of every laugh and every tear that had filled it. "How's your head?" Keanu asked quietly, reaching across the table to take her hand. "Strangely lighter," she said, surprised by her own answer. "The fear is still there, the questions are still there, but it's crowded now, with all these faces and stories, with the sound of everyone clapping when I blew out the candles. It's like my mind finally remembered that I'm not just my fear." She looked at him, eyes soft. "You did that, you and all of them, you built me this evidence." He shrugged, a little shy under the praise. "You gave us the material," he said. "We just put it in one place for you to see." For a few moments they sat in comfortable silence, the kind that comes after a storm has passed but the air is still charged. Then Alexandra took a breath and said, more calmly than she thought possible, "I think I'm ready to face the rest now. The tests, the appointments, all of it, I don't want to hide it from them forever. Not after tonight. Just not yet, but soon." He nodded, squeezing her hand. "When you're ready, we'll tell them," he said. "And judging by what we saw tonight, they'll show up just like they did here, with food and bad jokes and too many hugs." He smiled faintly. "You're not going to go through any of this alone. I won't let that happen." A quiet resolve settled in her chest. For weeks, the unknown had felt like a black hole waiting to swallow her. Tonight, it felt more like a dark tunnel she would walk through with others beside her, carrying lanterns made of memories and stories and small, stubborn acts of kindness. They stood and walked slowly through the emptying room, pausing by the easel with the photo of her at 19. Alexandra touched the frame lightly. "She had no idea," she murmured, "about any of this, about you, about tonight." She would be proud, Keanu said simply. She turned to him. What about you? She asked. Are you okay? I know this isn't easy for you either, loving someone when there's a question mark drawn over their future. He held her gaze, the depth in his eyes startling even after all their years together. Loving you is never going to come with guarantees, he said. None of this ever does, but I would rather have one honest year with you, filled with nights like this, than 50 years of running from what scares us. His voice dropped to a rough whisper. I'm in. Whatever the tests say, I'm in. The promise hit her with more force than any doctor's report ever could. It didn't erase her fear, but it anchored her in something stronger. She stepped forward and rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat, letting its steady rhythm answer the questions that words couldn't yet. They left the venue hand in hand, carrying a small box of leftover cake and an armful of slightly wilted roses. Outside, the air was cool, the sky clear. As they walked to the car, Alexandra tilted her head back and looked up at the stars. For the first time since the envelope had arrived in her mailbox, she didn't feel like they were looking down on her life from a great, indifferent distance. She felt improbably connected to them, tiny lights in a vast darkness, burning anyway. In the car, as they pulled away, she broke the quiet. You know, she said, a faint smile creeping into her voice, if the results come back and it turns out I'm fine, I'm going to be intolerable. I'll remind you every time I'm dramatic that you threw me a near-farewell party for nothing. He laughed, the sound rich with relief and something like gratitude. I'll take that, he said. I'll take you being intolerable and healthy over calm and sick any day. She looked out the window at the city lights sliding past and realized that, for the first time in weeks, she was imagining a future again, not just dreading it. Appointments, treatments if needed, more art, more nights like this. Maybe, just maybe, more birthdays where fear didn't get the loudest voice. Back home in the quiet of their kitchen at nearly midnight, they cut into the leftover cake with mismatched forks, still in their party clothes. No candles now, no speeches, just crumbs on plates and shared glances across the counter. To what did you wish? Keanu asked casually, only half serious. At the cake. Alexandra thought about lying, about saying something light. Instead, she answered with the same plain honesty that had carried her through the day. I wished, she said slowly, for the courage to live whatever time I have left fully, not half alive because I'm scared of what might happen. He raised his fork in a small, solemn toast. Then I guess, he said, your wish has already started coming true. She tasted the sweetness of the cake, the echo of laughter still hanging in the air, and the solid warmth of him beside her. The test results would come. The future would unfold as it chose. But tonight had already planted something inside her that no diagnosis could take away. A fierce, quiet conviction that her life, however long, however complicated, was deeply, irrevocably intertwined with the lives of others. And somewhere beneath all the fear, a new, unexpected thought settled in. Whatever comes next, she would not meet it as a woman defined by what she might lose, but as someone who had already given, already loved, already been loved back in a room full of candles and soft lights, and the steady, unwavering presence of a man who had planned a surprise party not to distract her from her fear, but to prove that even on the darkest days, there was still something worth celebrating. Her birthday, she realized, had not been about getting older at all. It had been about learning, finally, that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's walking into a room full of people who love you, heart pounding, tears ready, and letting them see you exactly as you are.